So you can come at existentialism from a variety of origin points, but what they have in common is what I kind of outlined, is that the first idea is the essential preconditions of life are sufficiently tragic to render the normative state of humanity pathological. And health and health and wholeness is something very difficult to aspire to or accomplish, and that the road to that health is the reduction of deceit. And so that's a thing that's also very interesting about the existentialists, because they make a very straightforward moral claim, which is that lies make people sick. And I'll tell you, in my experience as a psychotherapist, I mean, you know, I can tell you some of the things that make people sick. A lot of them have nothing to do with the psyche. The things that make people sick are, well, they get unemployed. It's like unemployment just lays people out, especially if they're conscientious. They just devour themselves, and it's so stressful, right? Because if you're unemployed, well, your finances become shaky almost right away, plus you don't have any routine, plus you're not involved in anything meaningful in relationship to society, you know, and then you start to eat yourself up with doubts and you know, self-criticism, especially if you're a conscientious person, or especially if you're a conscientious person who's high in negative emotion. It's like unemployment will just flatten you. And then the death or illness of yourself or a close relative, that's really hard on people. And there are situations at work that are difficult. So people are bullied, maybe they have a terrible supervisor, or they're in a pathological social structure, so that, you know, they're basically being bullied and oppressed with every step they take, or they're in a very horrendous relationship, but then things start to turn a bit. So, okay, so you can lose your job and you can be ill or dying, and so can people around you, and that'll lay you low a lot of the time. And no wonder, right? It's logical. And when people come to me with those sorts of problems, the first thing I often note is they're not psychological. I tell the people that. That's not a psychological problem. You're unemployed. That's an actual problem. And it's really useful to distinguish those, right? So for example, and this is something that psychiatric diagnosis does very, very badly. If someone comes to me and they're depressed, so they're not sleeping properly, they feel terrible in the morning, you know, they don't have a lot of energy, they're having a hard time experiencing any positive emotion, it's difficult for them to move, and they have a lot of negative thoughts about the past and the present and the future. I do an analysis of their life first to say, well, you know, do you have a job that's, you know, all right, that at least isn't horrifying? You know, is it okay for you to go to work in the morning? Do you have an intimate relationship that's basically functional? Do you have some friends? You know, are your relationships with your family members okay? Are you reasonably healthy apart from the depression? And do you have useful and interesting things to do that aren't related to your career? And if the person says yes to all of those and they're still feeling terrible, then I think, okay, this person is depressed, right? Because they don't have a problem, they're just depressed. And in my experience, those are the people who respond quite well to antidepressants. You know, because their nervous system isn't calibrating its analysis of their situation to the reality of the situation. It's as if their lower status, according to their status comparator, which is a very primordial thing, since even lobsters have it, their status comparator isn't paying attention to their actual status. And maybe that's because they're, you know, temperamentally high in negative emotion, or maybe it's because they had been traumatized earlier in their life, and so they're much more sensitive to any signs of failure. It's easier to knock them down.